I was schemed against by my own fiancé to fall from my horse. Also, his mentor's daughter could win first place in the hunt. When I woke up, the princess consort of Huainan was holding my hand, tearfully saying, "Dear child, this marriage. I am afraid it has wronged you." I looked at the guilt-stricken air behind her, and suddenly smiled sweetly. Who is this madam? And who might this young lord be? 3 months later, the newly ranked Tanhua came on a white horse in red robes, bearing an imperial decree to seek marriage with the duke's legitimate daughter. On the night, the bridal veil was lifted. He took my hand and pressed it to his heart. Does the young lady still remember giving a beggar a piece of cake in the snow 7 years ago? My fingertips trembled slightly, but he chuckled softly. No matter. There is plenty of life ahead. This humble servant will repay this kindness slowly. At the royal hunting grounds in spring, greenery was just beginning to sprout, yet the air still carried a lingering chill. The wind rustled through the newly sprouted tender leaves, mingling with the crackling of horse hooves crushing last year's dead branches, and the faint cheers and encouragement drifting from the distant stands. Zhou Yurong sat poised on her horse, her rouge-red riding outfit setting off her snow-white skin, her ink-black hair tied up high, adding to her valiant air. She lightly squeezed the horse's flanks, and the chestnut steed, Juyu, beneath her obediently quickened its pace, moving steadily along the somewhat muddy hunting trail. Today was the final day of the spring hunt, and also the crucial round to compete for that jade Rui scepter from the previous dynasty as the prize. As the legitimate daughter of the Duke's manor, she had practiced riding and archery since childhood. Though she wasn't as competitive as men, since she had joined in, there was no reason to do things half-heartedly. Zhou Yurong's gaze swept ahead, where a goose-yellow figure flickered in and out of sight among the trees. Su Yunhei, the only daughter of Zhao Ti's mentor. Zhao Ti being the heir of Prince Huainan, she had been frequently visiting the prince's manor lately, delicate as a fragile flower, needing careful tending. Zhou Yurong's gaze involuntarily followed the tall, dark figure further ahead. Zhao Ti, her fiancé, the heir to Prince Huainan's manor. They had been betrothed since childhood. Though their love couldn't be called deep as the sea, they treated each other with mutual respect, simply awaiting their wedding at year's end. At this moment, he was riding protectively close to Su Yunhei, with attention and focus she had never seen from him before. A trace of inexplicable bitterness brushed across her heart. Zhou Yurong shook her head, dispelling those unwanted emotions, just as she was about to urge her horse forward. Juya, beneath her, suddenly grew restless, its hooves anxiously pawing at the wet mud, snorting, its head tossing uneasily. Joyue? Zhou Yurong felt puzzled, gently stroking the horse's neck to try to calm it. This horse was personally selected for her by her father, with the gentlest and most reliable temperament. It had never acted this strangely before. From the direction of the viewing stand, her mother's anxious shouts seemed to reach her. Faint and unclear. The accident happened in an instant. Juyu let out a shrill, prolonged neigh without any warning, suddenly rearing up on its hind legs. Zhou Yurong was caught completely off guard, only managing not to be thrown off immediately by instinctively gripping the reins for dear life. Wronger. This time she heard clearly. It was Zhao Ti's voice, filled with alarm. In a split second, Zhou Yurong's out-of-control mount was already madly charging toward the low shrubbery on the side. In her jolting, spinning field of vision, Zhou Yurong saw Zhao Ti turn his head at the sound. His face was somewhat contorted in the chaos, and in that instant when their eyes met, Zhou Yurong saw it clearly. It wasn't pure shock and concern. There was a hint of panic he hadn't managed to hide in time, and deeper, more complex emotions she couldn't decipher at that moment, like reluctance after having made up his mind, or fear of things spiraling out of control. He even instinctively reined in his horse, his arm slightly raised, yet ultimately didn't come toward her, instead holding even tighter onto the pale-faced, terrified Su Yunhei beside him. Her heart sank sharply, faster than her body fell. Immediately after, searing pain shot through her side as it struck something hard. Her temple smashed heavily against a protruding stone on the ground, and everything went completely black. The last things to invade her consciousness were the raw smell of earth, the fresh bitterness of crushed grass, and a faint trace of an unfamiliar, cold fragrance. Consciousness slowly gathered amid waves of dull pain and the thick, bitter smell of medicine. Her eyelids were too heavy to lift. Her ears buzzed, mingled with suppressed sobs and whispers. Her temples throbbed with pulsing pain. Her whole body felt as if the bones had been torn apart and barely pieced back together, aching everywhere, heavy everywhere. Zhou Yurong struggled to open her eyes. Her blurry vision gradually focused, revealing the familiar sky, after rain blue embroidered canopy of her boudoir, with intertwining lotus patterns stitched in silver thread glimmering faintly in the dim light. She is awake! Miss is awake! The personal maid Yunshu, keeping watch by the bed, cried out tearfully, throwing herself at the bedside. Miss, how do you feel? Where does it hurt? A flurry of footsteps arose. Her mother, Madame Yu, the Duchess of Zhongguo, practically threw herself at the bedside. Tears streaked her well-maintained face, and her cold fingers trembled as they caressed her daughter's cheek. My child, thank heavens. You've finally woken up. You scared your mother to death. Her mother's warm embrace and familiar fragrance made Zhou Yurong's nose sting with emotion. She opened her mouth, but her throat was too parched to make a sound. Youngshu hurriedly propped up her back carefully with a soft pillow, and fed her a few sips of warm honey water, finally easing that burning thirst somewhat. Mother. Her voice was weak and hoarse. What happened to me? At the spring hunt, your horse suddenly went into heat for some reason, and threw you off. Madame Yu wiped her tears with a silk handkerchief, her tone still filled with lingering fear. You cracked your head open and were unconscious for a whole day. If anything had happened to you, how would Mother go on living? Just as she was speaking, a maidservant announced from outside, Madam, the princess consort and the young lord have come to visit the young miss. The bead curtain rustled softly, accompanied by the tinkling of jade ornaments and a faint scent of sandalwood. Princess consort, Xia of Huainan, wore a crimson-purple brocade robe with intertwining peony patterns. Her cloud, like hair piled high, hairpin ornaments gently swaying. Her bearing remained graceful and dignified, yet her face was full of heartache and guilt. She hurried to the bedside, her eyes already reddening before she spoke, and grasped Zhou Yurong's hand that rested outside the brocade quilt. Yurong, my child, you've suffered so much. The princess consort's hands were warm and soft, yet she gripped rather tightly with an imperceptible tremble. Look how pale this little face is. It is all that scoundrel Tai's fault. He was supposed to protect you. Make him apologize to you. She shifted slightly to the side. Only then did Zhou Yurong see the person standing behind her. Zhao Ti. He wore a moon-white brocade robe with cloud patterns, his handsome face drained of color, lips pressed into a pale thin line, with obvious dark circles pooled under his eyes. His gaze fell on her temple wrapped in thick gauze, then darted away as if scalded by that glaring white. His fingers curling slightly at his sides, his whole being radiating a taut guilt and struggle. All the images came crashing back into her mind in an instant. Before the horse bolted, she seemed to have glimpsed from the corner of her eye Zhao Ti riding closer, his riding whip seeming to sweep across Zueya's hindquarters accidentally, and with extreme speed, that inscrutable look in his eyes when he turned back. The muffled, curt male shout. She heard the moment she hit the ground, and when the horse doctor reported to her father, trembling with fear, those words, the horse's hindquarters do indeed have an extremely fine fresh wound, appearing to have been startled by being pricked with a sharp object, so that moment of panic was a guilty conscience. So when he reined in his horse and raised his arm slightly, it wasn't toward her. It was his final choice after that instinctive reaction. So, the so-called looking after his mentor's orphaned daughter, fulfilling Suyunhe's wish to come out on top, was something that could put his fiancé in mortal danger. Somewhere deep in her heart suddenly went cold, freezing her every limb and bone with a chill, her fingertips icy and numb. That coldness surged up to her eye sockets, but she forced it back down with all her might. She looked at the princess consort's face written all over with concern and apology, listening as she spoke ever more tactfully of severe injuries and needing long rest. Her words inside and out, beginning to lay groundwork for, "Don't let this delay things," and the prince's residence cannot rest easy in conscience. Just as her mother's expression shifted slightly, seemingly about to speak, Zhou Yurong suddenly let out a soft. The sound was faint, carrying the hoarseness and confusion of someone just woken. Yet it successfully blocked the princess consort's unfinished words in her throat, drawing all gazes over. Zhou Yurong opened a pair of clear, bewildered eyes, untainted by the slightest shadow of gloom or indignation. Brows slightly furrowed as she looked at the jewel-bedecked princess consort of Huainan before her. Her tone soft and unfamiliar, carrying complete confusion. "This, madam. Who is she?" The room fell silent in an instant. Her gaze shifted lightly, landing on Zhao Ti, whose face had suddenly turned deathly pale. His figure swaying almost imperceptibly, and tilted her head slightly, her eyes as pure as freshly melted snow, appearing all the more innocent and naive. "And this young lord, who is he? Why? Is everyone look—" The entire room was deathly silent, so quiet you could hear a pin drop. The perfectly measured grief and guilt on the princess consort of Huainan's face completely froze. The perfect mask cracking open a tiny gap, revealing the caught-off-guard astonishment beneath. Zhao Shi suddenly raised his head to look at her, opened his mouth slightly, his Adam's apple bobbing violently, yet couldn't utter a single word. Madame Yu, wife of Duke Zhongguo, froze for a moment, then sharply drew in a cold breath, immediately pulling her into an embrace and wailing loudly. "My poor child. After this fall, how can you not even recognize people anymore? I'll go summon an imperial physician at once." The best imperial physician! She lay against her mother's warm, slightly trembling shoulder, letting her mother tearfully explain to that stiffly standing mother and son. She injured her head. Perhaps blood congestion is pressing on it. That is why she temporarily can't recognize people. Yet, her gaze passed over her mother's shoulder and neck, falling on a white magnolia just beginning to bloom outside the window. The corner of her lips, in that unseen corner, curved ever so faintly, ever so coldly, then vanished just as quickly. So what if she remembered? Tear off all pretenses and confront them, receive their perhaps sincere repentance and compensation, then marry into the prince's manor, and in days to come when facing each other, watch them tread carefully out of guilt, while she herself felt a bone stuck in her throat. Or let the Duke Zhongguo's manor and Prince Huainan's manor become thoroughly hostile, putting father in a difficult position at court. Better to just forget. Forget it all completely. Save face for both sides and make a clean, thorough break. Zhou Yurong fell ill. Several groups of imperial physicians came, all saying more or less the same thing. Head trauma, blood stasis not yet dispersed, causing memory impairment, requiring quiet rest and recuperation. As for when she might recover, that was all up to fate. The Duke of Zhongguo's residence closed its doors to visitors, simply saying the young miss needed rest. The Prince of Huainan's residence sent countless precious tonics and medicinal herbs, and the princess consort personally came twice. Seeing that Zhou Yurong always wore that gentle yet distant expression, as if she didn't recognize her at all, she finally sighed, left behind a single rest and recover well, and stopped visiting. That once envied marriage engagement quietly ran aground in this kind of tacit silence. Without a sound, outside the window, the magnolias in the courtyard bloomed and withered, cherry blossoms clustered on branches, and warm breezes began to rise. Zhou Yurong leaned against the soft couch by the window, reading an idle book, her expression calm. The wound on her forehead had healed, leaving a faint pink new scar hidden deep within her temple hair. Her body had long since recovered, only she had grown thinner. Her chin pointed, making those eyes appear even larger, dark and deep, often gazing somewhere lost in thought. Her emotions impossible to read. "Miss." Yunshu tiptoed in, setting down freshly brewed jasmine tea, her tone carrying a hint of suppressed excitement and caution. "Have you heard? The examination results are out." Zhou Yurong's eyelashes fluttered slightly. She didn't raise her head, only letting out a soft, The servants in the residence had been gossiping a lot lately, and she had vaguely heard some of it. This year's Zhuangyuan, Bangyan, and Tanhua were all young talents, especially that Tanhua. Not only was his literary talent outstanding, his responses before the throne had greatly pleased the emperor, and his appearance was extraordinarily handsome, causing a sensation throughout the capital. I heard. Yunshu glanced at her expression, her voice dropping even lower. A few days ago, the Prince of Huainan's residence seems to have sent a matchmaker to Scholar Su's residence. Su Yunhe's father, Scholar Su, was none other than Zhao Ti's late mentor. The page paused for a moment at Zhou Yurong's fingertips, then was gently turned. She picked up the teacup and took a sip. The warm tea carried the delicate fragrance of jasmine, yet it couldn't suppress that faint bitterness on the tip of her tongue. As expected. Now that this stumbling block of hers had been removed in such a dignified manner, they naturally couldn't wait. Just as they were speaking, an unusual commotion suddenly came from the front courtyard, as if quite a few people were moving about and discussing something. A little maid came running in breathlessly, her face flushed red. "Miss, the madam wants you to get ready quickly. Up front, a heavenly envoy has arrived." A heavenly envoy and eunuch, announcing an imperial decree. Zhou Yurong was startled. The duke's residence held a noble title, and there was still a favored consort he in the palace. Receiving an imperial edict wasn't unusual, but why specifically summon her? Zhou Yurong hurriedly changed into formal attire for receiving guests. When she arrived at the front hall, her father, Duke Zhengguo Zhou Qing, and her mother, Madame Yu, were already waiting there with solemn expressions. Seeing her arrive, her mother quickly pulled her down to kneel, her eyes complex, filled with worry, yet also a hint of disbelieving joy. The eunuch's shrill voice rang out in the front hall. The flowery imperial decree roughly stated, "The newly appointed Tanhua Shuxuanji possesses outstanding talent and virtue, greatly pleasing our heart. We have heard that Zhou Yurong, the legitimate daughter of Duke Zhengguo Zhou Qing, is graceful and proper, awaiting marriage. We hereby bestow this marriage upon the two, to wed on an auspicious day, as a demonstration of imperial favor." Zhou Yurong knelt on the cold floor, her mind completely blank. Shu Xuanji, that Tanhua who was currently in the spotlight. She and he were complete strangers. Why would he ask to marry her? A woman who had fallen from a horse and lost her memory, and been essentially rejected by the prince's residence. She instinctively looked up. Her father's expression was solemn with a hint of scrutiny, while her mother's was mixed with worry and joy. Even after receiving the edict, expressing gratitude, and being sent into the bridal chamber, Zhou Yurong still felt all of this was as unreal as a dream. The duke's mansion and the Tanhua's residence were adorned with lanterns and festoons, guests filling the doorways. Zhou Yurong bore the heavy phoenix coronet, wearing elaborate wedding robes, like an exquisite porcelain doll, completing all the ceremonies amid the deafening gongs, drums, firecrackers, and the crowd's escort. Inside the bridal chamber, red candles burned high, the warm lamplight casting a hazy glow over the room's lavish furnishings. The air was thick with the cloying scent of pepper, room incense, and the smell of burning candle wax. Footsteps approached from afar, stopping at the door. Her heart inexplicably tightened. The door opened, and those masculine feet clad in bright red wedding boots stepped closer. One step at a time, the bridal veil was slowly lifted by a jade ruyi scepter wrapped in red silk, and her vision suddenly opened wide. Under the bright light of the dragon and phoenix wedding candles, Shu Xuanji stood before her, dressed in bright red ceremonial robes, embroidered with golden threads of auspicious clouds and coiling dragons. His face appeared powder white, his lips like painted vermilion, even more handsome and dignified than that fleeting glimpse during the day, so refined and noble that one dared not gaze directly. He dismissed the attendants. In an instant, only the two of them remained in the bridal chamber, so quiet that the soft crackling of the red candle wicks could be heard. His gaze fell calmly upon her face, studying her carefully, not like examining a bride, but rather like confirming some mark of a long-awaited reunion. His eyes so intent that her fingertips curled slightly. The nuptial wine was brought forth, arms intertwined, the distance between them extremely close. She lowered her eyes, able to smell the cool, clean scent on him, mingled with a faint fragrance of wine. The wine cups were taken away, yet he showed no intention of leaving. He suddenly took her hand. Zhou Yurong's fingertips flinched, instinctively wanting to pull away. But he guided her with undeniable steadiness, gently pressing her slightly cool palm against the left side of his chest. Through a layer of heavy, luxurious brocade, the heartbeat beneath was strong, beat after beat, steady yet scorching, making her slightly numb fingertips seem to tremble along with that rhythm. "Miss," he spoke, his voice low and mellow, melting into the warm night, carrying a hint of something indescribable. A sigh that seemed to have traversed long years of time. "Do you still remember, 7 years ago in the snowy outskirts of the capital, giving a still warm piece of osmanthus cake to a little beggar?" Zhou Yurong's fingertips trembled violently, and she abruptly lifted her head to look at him. 7 years ago, the outskirts of the capital, the snow, a beggar, dust, sealed memories were suddenly pried open a crack. It seemed to be an extremely cold winter. She accompanied her mother to a temple outside the city to offer incense and pray for blessings. On the way back, wind and snow raged. The carriage got stuck. That thin figure by the roadside, almost buried in snow. Those eyes frozen purple. Yet unusually dark and stubborn. The pastry box she shoved over. The carriage curtain falling as her mother urged them on. Fragmented images flashed by rapidly, blurry and unclear. She couldn't even remember the beggar's face clearly, only vaguely recalling those eyes. Startlingly bright. He was actually Shu Xuanji let out a low chuckle, gripping tighter the hand that wanted to flee, pressing even closer. That steady, powerful heartbeat seemed to pass through skin and blood, crashing directly into her heart that had been cold for so long. "It matters not." He leaned in closer, candlelight casting gently swaying shadows in the depths of his eyes. His warm breath brushed over her slightly parted lips and sensitive earlobes. His voice pressed extremely low, carrying a solemn promise. "Miss may not remember, but this servant has not dared forget for a single day. The rest of my life is long enough. This servant can slowly repay this kindness." Shu Xuanji's words were like a pebble tossed into a still lake, rippling out in layer upon layer of waves in the depths of her heart. Repaying kindness. So, he sought to marry her not out of love, nor from weighing interests, but merely because of that insignificant piece of pastry in the snow 7 years ago. Zhou Yurong stared blankly at the handsome face so close to her. Deep emotions swirled in his eyes, and beneath that gentleness, something more complex and indiscernible seemed to be hidden. She tried to pull her hand back, but he still held it steadily. His grip was too firm to break free from. Yet, it wouldn't hurt her. "My lord." She finally found her voice again, dry and slightly hoarse. "What I did back then was merely a trivial effort, not worth mentioning. You really don't have to." To Miss, it was a trivial effort. Shu Xuanji cut off her words, his gaze calm, yet his tone brooking no argument. To Shu Xuanji, it was salvation from a desperate situation. Had it not been for Mrs. Kindness of a meal that day, perhaps I would have frozen to death in the wind and snow. He slowly released her hand. That scorching body heat and powerful heartbeat suddenly retreated, leaving only a trace of lingering warmth in her palm. Zhou Yurong unconsciously curled her fingers. "The night grows late, and Miss has been weary today. Please rest early." He stepped back, resuming that perfectly measured distance and respect, as if the momentary intensity and emotional display just now were merely her illusion. He turned and walked toward the pearwood daybed on the other side of the room, unfastening his outer robe himself and lying down fully clothed. His posture was composed, without the slightest hint of intimacy expected on a wedding night. The red candles burned quietly, dripping winding trails of wax tears. Zhou Yurong sat stiffly at the edge of the canopy bed, draped with a bright red mandarin duck quilt, watching the upright figure on the couch not far away. Her mind in turmoil. Too much had happened this day. The imperial decree, the bridal sedan, the wedding chamber, and this completely unfamiliar husband, who claimed to be repaying a debt of gratitude. She had already prepared herself to spend her life recuperating in the Duke's manor, or to have her family arrange a loveless marriage of mutual respect and courtesy in the future. Yet she had never expected to marry such a person, in such a way. In the end, she lay down fully clothed, overcome by extreme exhaustion and confusion. The brocade quilt beneath her was soft and warm, carrying the scent of sunlight and spices, yet she kept her eyes open, only drifting into a hazy sleep in the latter half of the night. The next morning, Zhou Yurong woke to faint sounds of movement. Opening her eyes, what met her gaze was still the unfamiliar canopy embroidered with the 100 sons and 1,000 grandsons pattern, reminding her of the fact that she was now a married woman. Soft sounds of water and footsteps came from the outer room. She sat up and lifted the bed curtain. Shu Xuanji had already risen, dressed in a light cyan everyday robe, standing by the window while a servant boy tidied his attire. Morning light filtered through the latticed window, gilding him in a layer of pale gold, his profile refined and gentle. Hearing the movement, he turned his head, his gaze clear and bright. "Awake?" His tone was as natural as if they had been married for years. "My lord." Zhou Yurong lowered her eyelashes somewhat uncomfortably. The maidservant Yunxiu and several maids who had come as part of the dowry filed in carrying washing utensils. Upon seeing Shu Xuanji, they were all momentarily stunned, then hurriedly curtsied, their faces showing a mix of curiosity and shyness. Shu Xuanji nodded slightly and said to Zhou Yurong, "We'll enter the palace to give thanks at the start of the Sai hour. Breakfast is ready, have some, and I'll come for you when it is time." Having said that, he left first with his attendant, leaving the space to her. While she was getting dressed and made up, Yunxiu was styling her hair while quietly sharing the information she had gathered. "Miss No, madam. This servant heard that our master's household is simple. His parents passed away early, and he was raised with help from his clan's uncles. Only now that he placed third in the imperial examination and was granted an official position did he establish this residence. Besides a few old servants, there are no other relatives in the residence, not even a concubine or bed-warming maid. A simple household might be a good thing for her." After breakfast, Shu Xuanji came on time. He had changed into a deep teal official robe, making him look even more upright and distinguished in bearing. The two left the residence together, taking a carriage toward the imperial palace. In the golden throne hall, the emperor's majesty remained as ever, but the gaze upon them was noticeably much gentler. This subject Shu Xuanji, This subject's wife, Enfei Zhou, kowtows in gratitude for your majesty's gracious bestowal of marriage. Long live, long live, long, long live your majesty. The two respectfully performed the grand kowtow. The emperor looked at this perfect couple before him, the talented gentleman and beautiful lady, and was greatly pleased. He smiled and said, "When I bestowed this marriage, I felt you two were a perfect match. Now it seems that is indeed the case. I hope you will live in harmony as husband and wife, united in heart and purpose. We humbly accept your majesty's teachings and shall support each other, devoting our loyalty and wisdom." Xu Xuanji responded steadily, and Zhou Yurong followed with a kowtow of gratitude. The emperor nodded, bestowing generous gifts of silk and gold, then said, "I heard that consort he has been thinking of her niece often lately. Since you are in the palace, go visit Yanxi Palace, and let her share in your joy." This subject's wife obeys the decree. Upon exiting the great hall, a young eunuch from consort He's palace respectfully led the way ahead. Consort He's residence, Yangshi Palace, was not in the best location, yet it was peaceful and elegant. Inside the main hall, consort He, Enfei Zhou, was already seated and waiting. "Your niece Yurong, along with my husband Xu Xuanji, pays respects to consort. He may your ladyship live 1,000 years." Zhou Yurong and Xu Xuanji bowed again according to protocol. This time it was a family ceremony, showing greater intimacy. Rise quickly, consort He's voice was soft and gentle. She personally made a gesture to help them up, her gaze moving between the two, her smile deepening. "Good, truly good. Seeing you both like this, I am relieved." She looked specifically at Xu Xuanji. "Tong Xun, Yurong has been somewhat spoiled by the family since childhood. In the future, I hope you will be patient and understanding with her." Xu Xuanji bowed, his tone sincere. "Your Highness flatters me too much. To have Yurong as my wife is this humble subject's fortune. I will surely cherish and love her, not failing His Majesty and your Highness's grace, nor betraying the trust of my father-in-law, and mother-in-law." Consort He nodded with satisfaction, then took Zhou Yurong's hand and carefully examined her complexion. "After going through that troublesome business, you actually look more composed. It seems being married really does make a difference." Her words were full of an elder's care. Live well with Tong Xun from now on. As husband and wife, what matters most is being honest with each other and supporting one another. Yurong understands. Thank you for the teachings, Auntie. Zhou Yurong replied softly. In her own aunt's palace, she naturally switched back to the familiar form of address. Palace servants presented light tea and refreshments. Consort He asked about more household matters, her tone warm and affectionate. Are your parents in good health? Have you used the bloodbird's nest I sent the other day? Now that you've become someone's wife, you should gradually learn household management affairs. If there is anything you don't understand, you can submit a visiting card to enter the palace and ask me, or go home and ask your mother. She chattered on, completely like an ordinary family's aunt caring for her niece, making Zhou Yurong feel warm inside. Xu Xuanji listened quietly from the side, occasionally responding with a few words, his manner respectful yet not lacking in warmth. After chatting for a while, consort He seemed to remember something and smiled. Look at me, just going on and on. You've worked hard paying your respects. Go back and rest early. She had a palace maid bring over 2 brocade boxes. It is nothing too precious, just a pair of Ruyi jade pendants, symbolizing that you two will have everything go smoothly and live in harmony from now on. The two thanked her once again. Consort He then specifically said to Xu Xuanji, I am entrusting Yurong to you. This humble subject will not fail your ladyship's trust. After leaving Yanxi Palace, the afternoon sunlight was just right, warm and gentle as it fell upon them. Zhou Yurong held the pair of weighty Ruyi jade pendants, her heart filled with warmth and peace. Her ladyship cares for you very much, Shu Xuanji said softly. Zhou Yurong turned her head to look at him, a soft glow touching the corners of her eyes and brows. Auntie has treated me very well since I was little. He responded with a low murmur. The two said nothing more, only holding hands as they walked steadily toward the palace gates, step by step. The vermilion palace walls stretched endlessly, their figures leaning close together, as if it was always meant to be inseparable. The Tanhua's residence wasn't particularly large, a 3-courtyard compound, but it was arranged with remarkable elegance. Pavilions and terraces, small bridges overflowing water, craftsmanship visible everywhere. Though it lacked the grand imposing air of a duke's manor, it possessed its own charm of tranquil refinement. Shu Xuanji seemed very busy. On the 3rd day after their wedding, he had already resumed his daily habit of reporting to the Hanlin Academy. But he always returned to the manor on time to have dinner with her. Dinner was never dull. He would ask what she had done at home that day, what books she had read, and occasionally chat with her about interesting tidbits from the Hanlin Academy, or the sights and customs of the capital. He was knowledgeable and witty in conversation, yet never showed off, always able to make dry topics lively and interesting. Zhou Yurong gradually went from her initial reserve and wariness to occasionally responding with a few words. Shu Xuanji discovered she had quite insightful views on calligraphy and painting, and sometimes would even bring out his collected works to appreciate together with her. The days flowed by like a pool of spring water, calm and without ripples. That day, Shu Xuanji was home on his rest day. The two were playing chess by the study window. Zhou Yurong held the white pieces and was being beaten back steadily, furrowing her brows in deep thought. Shu Xuanji didn't rush her, just held his teacup, his gaze occasionally sweeping over her slightly furrowed brow and focused profile, his eyes gentle. Suddenly, the steward's slightly hurried voice came from outside the door. "Master, madam, an invitation has arrived from the Prince of Huainan's manor." The tranquil air in the study momentarily stilled. Zhou Yurong's hand holding the chess piece froze mid-air. Shu Xuanji set down his teacup, his expression unchanged. "What is it?" The steward replied from outside the door. "The manor is hosting a banquet, and has specially sent an invitation, inviting the master and madam to come for a gathering." Zhou Yurong's heart tightened slightly. What was meant to come would always come. After her amnesia, she had yet to formally meet anyone from her past. Especially Zhao Ti. She unconsciously glanced toward Shu Xuanji. He took the gold, embossed invitation presented by the butler, gave it a glance, and casually set it on the desk. His tone flat. "Understood. Reply to the prince's residence that my wife and I will certainly attend the banquet on time." The butler acknowledged and withdrew. Silence returned to the study, with only the rustling of wind through bamboo leaves outside the window. "If you don't want to go, you could claim illness." Shu Xuanji looked at her, his voice softening slightly, but Zhou Yurong shook her head. One could hide for a moment. 3 days later, carriages and horses bustled noisily before the Prince of Huainan's residence, guests arriving like clouds. The two appeared together, instantly attracting quite a few gazes. A talented man and a beautiful woman, like a perfectly matched pair. It is just that this pairing was quite unexpected to everyone. The newly appointed Tanhua and the Duke's daughter who had her engagement broken off due to amnesia. Whispers arose softly around them, eyes filled with curiosity, scrutiny, and perhaps a hint of watching a spectacle. Princess Consort Shi of Huainan personally came forward to greet them, her face full of smiles, warmth perfectly measured. "Compiler Shu, Madam Shu, please come in." Her gaze swept quickly across Zhou Yurong's face, scrutinizing. Seeing her expression calm and unruffled, her smile deepened. Zhou Yurong slightly bent her knees in a curtsy, her smile gentle and proper. It is the princess consort's birthday, so this junior naturally came to offer congratulations, wishing the princess consort blessings, longevity, and good health. Her words and demeanor were impeccable, yet carried the polite distance one should maintain toward elders. The princess consort smiled and took her hand, exchanging a few pleasantries, but her gaze kept drifting toward Shushwanji beside them, as if trying to read something from his face. Shushwanji maintained a faint smile throughout, responding with composure. After exchanging a few words with the princess consort, he led Zhou Yurong to their seats. The banquet was set in a waterside pavilion within the prince's manor garden. Melodious music played as wine cups clinked in toast. What was bound to come finally came. Zhao Ti walked over holding a wine cup. He was dressed in the heir's ceremonial attire today, golden crown and jade belt, yet couldn't hide the gloom and weariness between his brows. His gaze fell upon Zhou Yurong with complex emotions, his Adam's apple bobbing once before he turned to Shu Xuanji. "Compiler Shu, Madam Shu." His voice was somewhat hoarse, and his fingers gripping the wine cup tightened slightly. "Young lord." Shu Xuanji raised his cup in return, his manner calm. Zhou Yurong likewise raised her cup, nodding slightly, her eyes as calm as if looking at a stranger. "Young lord." Her tone was distant, without a ripple. Zhao Ti looked at her clear yet heartless eyes, as if she had truly erased him completely from her memory. His chest heaved violently, and his face paled a few more shades. He opened his mouth, seemingly wanting to say something, but in the end only drained the wine in his cup in one gulp and said bitterly, "Please, you two, take your time." Watching his somewhat staggering figure as he left, Zhou Yurong lowered her lashes, concealing a faint ripple at the bottom of her eyes. After all, he was someone she had once sincerely hoped to spend her life with in her youth. Even if her heart had grown cold, it wasn't made of stone. Suddenly, warmth spread over her hand. It was Shu Xuanji's hand gently covering the back of her hand under the table. His palm was broad and warm, with thin calluses, steadily enveloping her slightly cool fingertips, silently conveying a certain strength. Zhou Yurong's fingertips trembled, but she didn't pull away. Just at this moment, an official at the banquet who was on good terms with the Prince of Huainan's residence spoke up with a smile, though his tone carried a hint of barely perceptible provocation. "I've long heard that Tanhua Shu possesses extraordinary talent, and his responses before the throne greatly pleased His Majesty. Today is the princess consort's birthday. Such an auspicious occasion. Why doesn't Tanhua Shu compose a poem to add to the refined entertainment?" Everyone's gazes immediately converged over. This seemed like flattery, but actually put Shu Xuanji on the spot. If he did well, it was only expected. If he did ordinarily, he'd inevitably be criticized for failing to live up to his reputation. If he refused, he'd seem even more petty. Shu Xuanji's expression didn't change. He calmly released Zhou Yurong's hand, rose with cup in hand, pondered briefly, swept his gaze over the garden full of spring colors outside the waterside pavilion, and the fish swimming in the pond, and recited clearly, "On this auspicious day of the princess's birth, jade trees and fine banquet reflect the azure shore. Cranes years oft add 1,000 springs of life. Immortal peaches silently wish a century of bloom. Music floats as drifting clouds linger. Fish and birds rejoice in the fresh, gentle air. Fortunate as one who plucked cassia in the moon palace, I dare offer these humble verses to the honored one." The poem was refined and elegant, both appropriately offering birthday wishes and cleverly incorporating his status as one who plucked cassia in the moon palace. Neither servile nor arrogant, composed and magnanimous. The hall fell silent for a moment, then erupted in waves of praise. "Wonderful. What a fine poem. Tanhua Shu truly lives up to his reputation. Such quick wit, truly admirable." A flash of embarrassment crossed the face of the official who had spoken, but he could only join in the praise. The Princess of Huainan was all smiles, thanking him repeatedly, and ordered that he be generously rewarded. Xu Xuanji sat down calmly, amid the sounds of admiration, as if what he had just done was merely a trivial matter. He turned his head and glanced at Zhou Yurong very quickly, his eyes actually carrying a hint of something almost imperceptible. A look seeking praise? Zhou Yurong was momentarily stunned by this rare expression of his, and subconsciously curved the corners of her lips. She picked up her teacup, using the motion of sipping tea to hide that unconscious hint of a smile. After this incident, no one at the banquet dared to easily test this seemingly gentle, newly appointed Tanhua. And between him and Zhou Yurong, that invisible, subtle barrier seemed to have quietly melted away somewhat, in that handshake and smile. Halfway through the banquet, guests left their seats in twos and threes to enjoy the garden scenery. Zhou Yurong came out accompanied by her maid after freshening up, but when passing through a peony garden, someone blocked her way. It was Su Yunyi. She was wearing a delicate goose, yellow dress, standing there like a willow swaying in the wind. Her eyes slightly red, looking at Zhou Yurong, wanting to speak but hesitating, pitifully helpless. "Zhou, Madame Xu." Her voice was soft and gentle, with a choked sob. Zhou Yurong stopped in her tracks and looked at her with a calm expression. "Is there something you need, Miss Su?" Su Yunhei stepped forward, tears welling up in her eyes, suddenly about to kneel down. "Madame Xu, I am so sorry. That day during the hunt, if it weren't for me, Brother Tai wouldn't have, causing you to fall from the horse and get injured, even losing your memory. This is all my fault." Yun Su, who was following behind Zhou Yurong, changed her expression and was about to step forward. But Zhou Yurong raised her hand to gently stop her. She watched Su Yunhei's superb acting before her, feeling no ripples in her heart, even finding it somewhat laughable. She slightly turned aside, avoiding this bow. Her tone distant. "Miss Su is being too hard on yourself." The fall from the horse was an accident, unrelated to anyone. As for the memory loss, perhaps it is heaven taking pity on me, letting me forget some unnecessary worries. Miss Su needn't feel burdened. Su Yunhei's crying stopped abruptly, seemingly not expecting this kind of reaction from her. Lifting her tear, blurred face, staring blankly at her. Zhou Yurong no longer looked at her, saying indifferently, "If Miss Su has no other matters, please excuse me for leaving first." After saying this, she led her maidservant and calmly walked past her. After walking a few steps, she could still feel that disbelieving, even slightly resentful gaze from behind. Just as she rounded the rockery, she saw Xu Xuanji standing with his hands behind his back beneath the moon gate, seemingly having waited for a while. Sunlight filtered through the gaps in the foliage, casting dappled shadows across him. He watched her, his gaze deep, carrying a hint of scrutiny, and a trace of complex emotions she couldn't decipher. He heard everything. Zhou Yurong's heart inexplicably tightened. Their gazes met in the air. The babbling of water through the crevices of the rockery stones only made this moment feel exceptionally quiet. Zhou Yurong stopped in her tracks, unsure how much he had heard or what he was thinking. The way she had handled Su Yunhei, would he think her calculating and scheming, not the gentle amnesiac she appeared to be on the surface? Yet Xu Xuanji didn't press further. He simply extended his hand toward her, his tone unchanged. "It is stuffy at the banquet. The lotus pond at the west corner of the garden has lovely scenery. Would you like to take a stroll?" His palm was broad and sturdy, his knuckles well-defined, suspended quietly in the air, awaiting her response. That posture was so natural, as if they were already a couple married for years with an unspoken understanding. Zhou Yurong hesitated for a moment, but eventually placed her hand into his palm. His fingers closed around hers at once, warm and steady, enveloping her cool hand. He led her around the rockery, walking westward along the bluestone path. He led her away from that uncomfortable encounter just now, without pressing, without questioning, using only this simple gesture to silently make his stance clear. The lotus pond was serene and secluded, with newly sprouted lotus leaves just showing their pointed tips, sparsely dotting the water's surface. The evening breeze swept past, bringing humid water vapor and the faint fragrance of grass and trees, dispersing the clamor of the banquet and the slight melancholy in her heart. Just now, Zhou Yurong finally couldn't help but speak up, wanting to explain a thing or two. You handled it well. Yet Xu Xuanji cut off her words, his gaze falling on the shimmering water, his profile appearing soft in the twilight. Unnecessary worries. Better to forget them. His tone was calm, yet it was like a pebble dropped into the lake of her heart. Did he believe her? Or did he simply not care whether she had truly lost her memory, only caring that she was Madame Xu at this moment? The two walked slowly side by side, momentarily without words, yet feeling no awkwardness. His hand had never let go. And where their palms pressed together, warmth. My lord seems quite familiar with the prince's manor gardens. Zhou Yurong found a topic to break the silence. He had led the way here just now without showing any unfamiliarity. Xu Xuanji's steps paused slightly, then he said calmly, after placing as Tanhua, I came to the prince's manor twice with my mentor. He turned his head to look at her, a trace of faint amusement passing through his eyes. Madam is quite observant. Just as they were speaking, faint sounds of a hushed argument drifted from up ahead, sounding somewhat familiar. Xu Xuanji's brows furrowed slightly as he pulled her silently behind a dense cluster of green bamboo. Concealed by the bamboo leaves, they could just see the scene in the small pavilion ahead. Standing face to face in the pavilion were none other than Zhao Ti and Su Yunhe. Zhao Ti had his back to them, his figure tense, his tone carrying suppressed anger and impatience. You went to find her again just now. Yunhe told you, this matter is over. Why must you stir up trouble again? Su Yunhe lifted her face, tears glistening in her eyes, her voice aggrieved and choked with sobs. Tige, I just feel so guilty and uneasy. If it weren't for me, you wouldn't have resorted to such measures, and Miss Zhou wouldn't have. Now that she is married to another. Can you really accept that? Shut up. Zhao Ti cut her off sharply, his voice suddenly rising. Then realizing his loss of composure, he forcefully suppressed it, tinged with weariness and warning. What measures? That was just an accident. Don't spout such nonsense again. As for her, he paused, his voice dropping low and becoming unclear. Since she no longer remembers, and has married, then, we each live our own lives. Zhou Yurong hid behind the bamboo grove, her fingers suddenly clenching tight, nails digging into her palms. Measures? Accident. Though she had long guessed the truth, hearing the person involved nearly admit it with her own ears, that icy chill still instantly shot through every limb and bone. So her life, in those two's eyes, was actually this worthless. For a hunting prize, to win a beauty's smile, a warm, large hand gently covered her tightly clenched fist, with undeniable strength, prying her fingers open one by one, then holding them in his palm. Xu Xuanji said nothing, just held her hand, his grip steady, silently conveying support. Yet his gaze was sharp as a blade, coldly fixed on those two in the pavilion, his jawline drawn extremely tight. In the pavilion, Su Yunhe seemed frightened by Zhao Ti's stern expression, crying even louder. Tige, you are being mean to me. You were never mean to me before. I know, you still think about her in your heart, don't you? Then our marriage. Mother has her own plans for the marriage. Zhao Ti's tone was irritated, clearly unwilling to discuss further. Go back first. Stop drawing attention. With that, he actually ignored the whimpering Su Yunhe, flicked his sleeve and turned striding away. Su Yunhe stood alone in the pavilion, watching Xiaoyan's resolute retreating figure, the soft aggrievement on her face gradually fading, replaced by a trace of unwillingness and resentment. She stomped her foot hard, then also turned and left by another path. Silence returned to the bamboo grove, with only the rustling sound of wind stirring the leaves remaining. Only then did Shu Xuanji let go of her hand, saying in a low voice, "Let's go." On the carriage back to the manor, the atmosphere was even more subdued than when they came. Zhou Yurong leaned against the carriage wall, watching the streetscape rapidly retreating outside the window, neon lights flickering on and off across her face. Those deliberately suppressed images she refused to recall surged up again. The panicked neighing of the horse, the violent jolting, the sharp pain of her temple striking the stone, and Zhao Ti's complicated cold gaze. So behind it all was such despicable scheming. A slightly cool handkerchief was handed before her eyes. Zhou Yurong looked up in a daze, meeting Shu Xuanji's deep eyes. He didn't look at her, his gaze resting on empty space, yet his voice was low and gentle. "If you feel nauseous, there is no need to hold it in." So he had noticed her pale complexion and cold fingertips. She hesitantly took the handkerchief but didn't wipe anything, just clutched it tightly in her hand, the soft silk fabric pressing against her palm. "You knew all along." She finally voiced the doubt in her heart. Did he seek to marry her also because he knew the inside story? Shu Xuanji was silent for a moment before saying, "Not exactly. I only know your fall from the horse was no accident. It was related to those two." He turned his head, his gaze settling calmly on her face. "As for the specific reasons, they don't matter. What matters is that now you are my wife." His tone was calm and flat, yet carried an undeniable possessiveness and protectiveness. "Why me?" Zhou Yurong looked at him, the candlelight flickering in the depths of her eyes. "Just because of a piece of pastry." Shu Xuanji met her gaze. The light inside the carriage was dim, his eyes so deep one couldn't see the bottom. After a long while, he finally spoke slowly, his voice low and clear. "That piece of pastry kept me alive. And you." He leaned in slightly, his breath brushing over her forehead. "Make me want to live, and to live better." These words were like a warm current, crashing unexpectedly into her frozen heart, stirring up surging ripples. She stared at him blankly, momentarily forgetting how to speak. The carriage happened to stop at this moment, and the coachman reported from outside. "My lord, my lady, we have arrived at the residence." Shu Xuanji got off the carriage first, still extending his arm, waiting for her to hold on to him as she stepped down. The lanterns at the manor gate gave off a warm glow, stretching his tall figure into a long shadow. He stood in the light, turned back to look at her, his gaze calm, waiting. Zhou Yurong took a deep breath, suppressing those chaotic, cold emotions, and placed her hand in the crook of his arm. This time, her fingertips were no longer so cold. The days seemed to return to their previous calm, yet something had quietly changed. After returning from the prince's manor that day, Shu Xuanji seemed to treat her with even more attentiveness. He would pay attention to her dietary preferences, the study gradually filled with travel journals and casual reads she liked. And once on a rest day, he actually rolled up his sleeves, and following a recipe he'd found from who knows where, simmered a bowl of rock sugar bird's nest for her in the small kitchen. Though his control of the heat was somewhat clumsy, the taste was unexpectedly light and sweet. Zhou Yurong held that warm bowl of bird's nest, looking at his profile flushed slightly from the stove fire, and another corner of the ice in her heart quietly melted away. She began trying to take care of some small matters for him, like sorting and organizing the books he often read, leaving a lamp lit and keeping a late night snack warm when he came home late. The words between them were still not many, yet gradually there developed a kind of silent understanding. This day, Shu Xuanji returned to the manor after leaving office, a barely noticeable solemnity between his brows. During dinner, he brought up seemingly casually. The capital hasn't been very peaceful lately. Several officials' households have been hit by night burglars. Though no lives were lost, some valuables were taken. Madam, if you have no pressing matters, please go out less after dusk. I've also assigned extra guards to patrol the residence. Zhou Yurong's hand holding the chopsticks paused slightly, and she looked up at him. Has something happened in the court? She keenly sensed that what he mentioned were no ordinary petty thieves. Xu Xuanji glanced at her, seemingly appreciating her perceptiveness, yet didn't elaborate. Just some lowly criminals. His Majesty has already ordered the capital magistrate to investigate thoroughly. No need to worry too much. Though he spoke lightly, Zhou Yurong kept it in her heart. Over the next few days, she noticed the guards around the residence had indeed become much stricter, and Xu Xuanji's return times grew increasingly irregular. Sometimes he wouldn't come back until deep into the night, carrying the cold dew of the outdoors on him. That night, Zhou Yurong had already gone to sleep, but was awakened by faint movements outside the window. It seemed to be very soft footsteps and hushed voices coming from the direction of the study. Slightly suspicious, she draped on her clothes and got up. Quietly walked to the carved door connecting the bedroom and the study, and listened carefully. The study was brightly lit with candles, casting two blurry silhouettes. One was Xu Xuanji, and the other had a burly build, appearing to be dressed as a guard. You are certain they were after the canal transport ledgers? It was Xu Xuanji's voice, pressed extremely low, yet carrying a cold, sharp edge. Yes, my lord. The opponent's moves were swift and clean, like military training, and they were extremely familiar with the layout of the Ministry of Revenue's archives. If we hadn't been prepared in advance, I am afraid. The guard's voice was rough, laced with lingering fear. The ledgers have been properly secured. Xu Xuanji cut him off. As per your orders, they've been moved to a safe location. But my lord, since the opponent failed this time, they likely won't let it go. Xu Xuanji's tone was calm, yet possessed a reassuring strength of its own. Since they've already resorted to desperate measures, it means we're about to touch the core. Protect the ledgers well, assign more men, and secretly guard the madam's safety. There must be no slip-ups. Yes. Also, has there been any unusual activity from the Prince of Huainan's residence recently? The heir Zhao Tai seems to be in close contact with the son of the Vice Minister of War, meeting privately multiple times at Juxian Tower in the south of the city. As for Academician Su's residence, there is nothing particularly unusual, only that Miss Su has been frequently going to Jingshin Nunnery outside the city to burn incense lately, staying for most of the day, each time. Jingshin Nunnery, Xu Xuanji mused for a moment. Keep watching. If there is the slightest sign of trouble, report immediately. This subordinate understands. The study fell into brief silence, followed by the faint sound of pages turning. Zhou Yurong held her breath and silently retreated to the bedside. Yet her heart was pounding wildly. Grain transport ledgers, military connections? The Prince of Huainan's residence? The Vice Minister of War? Though she had long lived in the inner chambers, she knew that grain transport concerned the national treasury's taxes and the capital's grain supplies. It had always been a lucrative prize fought over by various factions, with unfathomably deep waters. Yet Xu Xuanji, as a Hanlin Academy compiler, shouldn't be directly involved in such matters by rights. What exactly was he secretly investigating, that it drove the other party to break into the Ministry of Revenue's archives at night? And just now he specifically mentioned protecting her safety. An indescribable warmth mingled with worry slowly flowed through her heart. He hadn't merely placed her in the rear residence as someone to repay a debt to. His world was full of raging waves. Yet within those waves, he had clearly carved out a safe haven for her. The next day at breakfast, Xu Xuanji had faint dark circles under his eyes, yet his expression was as calm and gentle as always. as if last night's secret discussion in the study had been nothing but a dream. Zhou Yurong didn't ask much either. Only when he rose to leave for the yamen, she softly said, "My lord, please be careful in all things." Xu Xuanji's steps paused, and he turned to look at her. In the morning light, she wore a simple, pale turquoise ruquan, without any makeup. Yet a trace of obvious worry lingered between her brows. His gaze softened, and he stepped closer, raising his hand to ever so gently touch a strand of hair that had fallen beside her cheek. The gesture so naturally intimate that both of them were slightly startled. "All right," he responded softly, a faint hint of a smile in his voice. "Wait for me at home." Only after his figure disappeared behind the screen wall did Zhou Yurong slowly raise her hand, touching the place where his fingertips had just brushed. There seemed to still linger a trace of warmth. The lake of her heart could no longer be calm. However, the tree desires stillness, but the wind will not cease. In the afternoon, Zhou Yurong was copying calligraphy when the gatekeeper came to report that Miss Su Yunhei had come to visit. Zhou Yurong furrowed her brows. After the prince's manor birthday banquet, she had thought there would be no more dealings with this person. After a moment's thought, she still had her shonen. Su Yunhei was dressed plainly today, yet her face bore an unmistakable look of anxiety and panic. Upon entering the flower hall, she dismissed the attendants, then fell to her knees before Zhou Yurong with a thud, tears streaming down like rain. "Madam Xu, please save Brother Tai." Inside the flower hall, incense curled in wisps. Sunlight was bright outside the window, yet Su Yunhei's sudden kneeling and crying made the atmosphere of the entire space tense up abruptly. Zhou Yurong sat upright without moving, watching the woman kneeling before her with tears streaming down like pear blossoms in the rain. Her brows furrowing almost imperceptibly. She did not immediately help her up, only said indifferently, "What does Miss Su mean by this? The young lord's status is noble. If there are difficulties, naturally, the prince's manor and the court will handle them. Why would you need me to save him? If such words were to spread, it would be improper for both you and the young lord." Her voice was calm, carrying a sense of detachment, alerting Su Yunhei to the recklessness and danger of her actions. Su Yunhei's crying halted abruptly as she raised her blurred face, seemingly not expecting such a calm reaction from her. She bit her lip, as if having made an enormous decision, shuffled forward, 2 steps on her knees, lowered her voice, her tone urgent and panicked. "Madam, this matter is no small thing. It is not an ordinary difficulty. Brother T, he might have gotten caught up in enormous trouble. The only one we can turn to now is Lord Shu." Trouble. Zhou Yurong's heart sank, but her face revealed nothing. The young lord acts with propriety. Miss Su is perhaps worrying too much. No, that is not it. Su Yunhei shook her head vigorously, tears pouring out again. "Madam, do you know that day of the spring hunt?" She suddenly stopped at this point, her eyes flickering, as if having great reservations, but ultimately gritted her teeth and said it. Her voice pressed extremely low, like a whisper. "The horse incident that day was not entirely an accident." Zhou Yurong's fingertips trembled, gripping the teacup tightly. She really did know. She might even have been involved. She remained composed, only slightly raising her eyebrows, showing just the right amount of confusion and a hint of displeasure. "Miss Su, this matter has already been concluded. It was an accident caused by a startled horse. Now you bring up old matters with cryptic words. What exactly are you trying to do? If you continue making baseless claims, forgive me for not keeping you company." She made as if to rise. "Please calm down, madam." Su Yun hastily grabbed her skirt hem, as if grasping at the last straw, no longer caring about anything else, stammering urgently. "I misspoke. I was confused, but Brother Ti is now being coerced, and it is related to this matter." Those people have gotten hold of some traces from that day, forcing him to work for them. Now that things are about to be exposed, they want to sacrifice the pawn to save the king. And Brother T might, she cried, her whole body trembling, not seeming fake. Those people have eyes and hands everywhere, ruthless and vicious. Even the prince's residence might not be able to protect him. Now only Lord Shu has the emperor's deep trust, and is upright and incorruptible, perhaps able to uncover the truth and clear Brother Yan's name. I beg, madam, for the sake of our past friendship, persuade Lord Shu to save his life. Zhou Yurong was greatly shaken. Zhao Ti was actually being coerced because of this. Naturally, she did. But if what she said was true, Zhao Tai was also being manipulated and controlled, and might even be in mortal danger. She was silent for a moment, ultimately unable to harden her heart and completely ignore it. It wasn't because of old feelings, but because it concerned a life. And perhaps was entangled with an even greater conspiracy. She slowly withdrew her skirt hem, her voice still calm. Miss Su, not a single word of what you said today have I understood. If the young lord is truly in trouble, the proper course is to report to the prince and princess, or to submit a petition to the court. How could an outside official easily interfere in the affairs of the prince's residence? As for my husband, being a Hanlin compiler, his duty lies in compiling books and writing histories, making it even more inappropriate to inquire about other matters. You've asked the wrong person. These words of hers both pointed out the rules and cleared her of any involvement, leaving no handle for others to grasp. Su Yunhei collapsed limply on the ground, all color drained from her face. The last glimmer of hope in her eyes extinguished, leaving only hollow despair. Zhou Yurong no longer looked at her, raising her voice to call out, Yun Shu, see the guest out. Miss Su is unwell, escort her out properly. Yun Shu entered at the call, politely yet firmly, escorting the distraught Su Yunhei out. The flower hall returned to silence, with only the scent of cold tea in the heart. Stopping words from moments ago lingering in the air. Zhou Yurong sat alone by the window, her mind in turmoil. How much of Su Yunhei's words were true? How much false? Was it another carefully crafted trap meant to drag Shushwanji down as well? Or was Zhao Ti truly imprisoned with no way out? Should she tell Shushwanji? If she did, would it disrupt his plans? Put him in even greater danger? He had only encountered surveillance last night, and today, Su Yunhei came to her door seeking help. The timing was far too coincidental. If she kept it hidden, what if Zhao Tai really lost his life because of it? Her fingertips unconsciously traced the cool porcelain cup as she found herself caught in a dilemma. Not until dusk closed in did Shu Xuanji return to the residence. He seemed especially exhausted today. A barely perceptible gravity between his brows. But the moment he stepped through the door and saw her sitting under the lamplight waiting for him, that gravity quietly melted away, giving way to warmth. Waiting for me. He unfastened his cloak and asked casually. Zhou Yurong rose, took his cloak and hung it up, then poured him a cup of hot tea. Today, was the yamen business very busy? Shu Xuanji took the teacup, his fingertips inadvertently brushing against hers, and both paused for a moment. He looked up at her, his gaze deep. It was all right, just year-end evaluations, a few more trivial matters. He paused, looking at her. You seem to have a weary look about you today. Did something happen at the manor? He had keenly sensed something was off with her. Zhou Yurong struggled internally, her fingertips curling in the end. Worry overwhelmed everything else. She couldn't take the risk. If it really was a trap, he needed to know and be prepared. If Zhao Ti was truly in imminent danger, perhaps he really had a way to have it both ways. She took a deep breath, looked up at him, and decided to speak frankly. This afternoon, Su Yunhei came by. Xu Xuanji's hand holding the cup paused slightly, his gaze suddenly turning sharp. What did she come for? Though his tone was calm, it carried an invisible pressure. Zhou Yurong recounted. Su Yunhei's tearful plea as objectively as possible, without adding any of her own speculation or emotions, including how Su Yunhei had almost admitted in her desperation that there was more to the spring hunt horse incident, as well as her plea for help about Zhao Ti possibly being coerced, and his life being in danger. After she finished speaking, the hall fell into silence. The candle flames crackled, casting shifting light and shadow across Xu Xuanji's profile. His eyes were deep and unreadable, revealing neither joy nor anger. After a long while, he slowly set down his teacup, making a crisp, soft sound. How did you respond? He asked, his voice devoid of emotion. I did not agree. I only said this matter was improper and told her to seek proper channels through the prince's residence or the court. Zhou Yurong answered truthfully, paused, then added softly. I found this matter suspicious. Perhaps there is an ulterior motive. Xu Xuanji's gaze fell on her face, and that sharp scrutiny gradually softened into something complex and gentle. He suddenly reached out and gently squeezed her slightly cool fingers. You did well. His affirmation let her anxious heart settle a little. This matter, he mused, his fingertips unconsciously tapping on the table, has surfaced faster than I expected. A cornered dog will jump over the wall. It seems they're truly desperate now. Who are they? Zhou Yurong couldn't help but ask. Xu Xuanji looked at her, silent for a moment, then finally said, the connections run deep. It may involve the struggle among princes, corruption in canal transport, even arms trafficking. Zhao Ti. Any single one of these was enough to stir up monstrous waves. Then, she unconsciously used the word we. Xu Xuanji clearly noticed, a faint trace of a smile flickering in the depths of his eyes, immediately replaced by solemnity. Now that you know about this matter, you must be even more careful. In the coming days, no matter who invites you to leave the manor or to meet, under any pretext, you must not agree. I will further strengthen the guards in the manor. He stood up, walked to her, and looked down at her with eyes as deep as the night. Yurong, he called her name for the first time, his voice low and solemn. Trust me. I have my own plans for this matter, and I will never let you be put in danger. His gaze was too intense, his promise too heavy, making Zhou Yurong's heart skip a beat. She stared at him in a daze and nodded. In this moment, those doubts about repaying a debt of gratitude seemed to quietly fade away, and some deeper, closer bond silently grew between them. However, the storm did not slow down because of their vigilance. The next morning, just as dawn began to break, a rush of hoofbeats and clamor shattered the tranquility of the manor. The butler scrambled frantically to the outside of the main courtyard, his voice panicked and distraught. Master, madam, this is bad. The Jingzhou Yin has brought a large group of officers and surrounded the mansion gate. They say it is by imperial decree to investigate a case, and they want to take Master in for questioning. The 4 words, by imperial decree to investigate, exploded like thunder over the peaceful mansion in the quiet of early morning. Zhou Yurong's heart sank sharply, and she instinctively looked toward Xu Xuanji beside her. Yet he seemed to have expected this, his expression calm as still water, only a flash of cold, sharp light passing through his eyes. He gently patted the back of her hand, his movements steady, showing no hint of panic. "It is fine. I'll go and come right back. Stay in the mansion, keep the doors tightly shut, and see no one, no matter who comes." His composure steadied her. Zhou Yurong took a deep breath, suppressing the alarm in her chest, and nodded. "I'll wait for you to come back." Xu Xuanji gave her a deep look, then turned and strode out. The morning light outlined his tall, pine-straight silhouette, exuding a resolute air of one man holding the pass against all. Outside the manor gate, Magistrate Feng of the capital prefecture stood with dozens of blade, wielding bailiffs, his expression solemn. Seeing Xu Xuanji come out, he cupped his hands in greeting, yet his tone brooked no argument. "Compiler Xu, pardon the offense. Someone has secretly reported that you colluded with the Canal Gang, smuggled contraband, and are suspected of involvement in the recent theft from the Ministry of Revenue's archives. Please accompany this humble official back to the Yamen to assist with the investigation." His voice was not quiet, loud enough for the early rising neighbors peeking around to hear everything clearly. Colluding with the Canal Gang, smuggling contraband, the Ministry of Revenue theft. Each charge was a capital offense serious enough to cost one's head. Xu Xuanji's expression remained unchanged as he said calmly, "Magistrate Feng, since this is to assist with an investigation, I shall naturally cooperate. However, these accusations of collusion and smuggling are baseless claims without evidence. I hope Your Honor will investigate thoroughly and clear my name." "Naturally." Magistrate Feng waved his hand. "Take him away." The bailiff stepped forward but did not use shackles, merely escorting Xuanji on either side as he boarded the carriage. The attitude seemed polite on the surface, but in reality it was an escort under arrest. The carriage rumbled away, leaving behind a deathly silence at the manor gate, and countless gazes filled with shock and suspicion. Zhou Yurong stood behind the screen wall, her fingers ice, cold, tightly clutching the hem of her skirt. She forced herself to calm down. The capital magistrate came by imperial decree to arrest him, yet didn't immediately raid the house and take everyone into custody. This meant the evidence wasn't solid, or perhaps His Majesty had other considerations. Xu Xuanji's composure just now was definitely not an act either. But those two words, by imperial decree, weighed down like a mountain. For the entire day, the Xu residence's main gate remained tightly shut, refusing all visitors. The atmosphere inside the residence was as oppressive as the sea before a storm, the servants hurrying about with panic written on their faces. Zhou Yurong sat upright in her room, seemingly calmly doing needlework, yet her fingertips had been pricked by the needle several times, oozing beads of blood. She didn't believe those charges. If he wanted to embezzle, why would he have waited until now? If he were that kind of person, how could there be such upright and resolute light in his eyes? But this sudden frame-up was clearly aimed at him. Was it because of that ledger? Because he had investigated to a critical point? At dusk, Yunsho came in with a pale face and whispered, "Madam, I found out. It is spreading like wildfire outside. They say the evidence is irrefutable, and there is a witness. It is a minor boss from the Canal Gang, insisting he was acting under the master's orders." "A witness! They're trying to seal the charges!" Also, Yunsho's voice dropped even lower, tinged with a sobbing tone. This servant heard from the doorkeeper that in the afternoon, someone from the Huainan prince's manor came by, saying the princess was concerned and wished to invite Madame over for a chat. But we declined according to the master's instructions. The Huainan prince's manor. At this critical juncture, was it genuine concern, or a probe? Or perhaps, related to that, witness, Zhaoti was coerced. Did the manor know, or was it all along? Countless thoughts swirled in chaos, making her head throb as if splitting. She couldn't panic. Absolutely couldn't panic. Yunsho. She took a deep breath, striving to keep her voice steady. Help me change. Prepare the carriage. I am going back to the Duke's manor. For now, the only ones she could turn to were her maiden family. Though her father, the Duke of Zhongguo, had already retired, he still held prestige at court, and might be able to gather more information. The carriage traveled along streets shrouded in twilight, and Zhou Yurong could clearly feel all kinds of gazes cast her way along the route. Curiosity, sympathy, schadenfreude. The glory of being the wife of the Tanhua had in an instant turned into the desolation of a prisoner's family. The gatekeeper at the Duke Zhongguo's residence was visibly startled upon seeing her, and hurriedly welcomed her inside. Her mother, Madame Yu, pulled her into an embrace with reddened eyes the moment she saw her. My child, why have you come back? Is it because of Tongxun's matter? We've all heard. What on earth is going on? Her father, Zhou Qing, sat in the grand chair with a solemn expression, waving his hand to dismiss the attendants. Father, mother. Zhou Yurong steadied herself and recounted the important parts. The capital magistrate's arrest, the outside rumors, and Su Yunhei's plea for help yesterday. Finally, she said, Your daughter doesn't believe my husband would do such a thing. There must be injustice behind this. I beg, father. Zhou Qing raised his hand to stop her words, his gaze piercing as he said in a deep voice, Feng Qiong, the capital magistrate, is a slippery one. Without some certainty, he wouldn't dare to easily move against an Tanhua personally appointed by His Majesty. This matter is indeed troublesome, I am afraid. He pondered for a moment, then continued. You just mentioned that the Prince of Huainan's residence has been in frequent contact with the Vice Minister of War's family recently. And the Su family's daughter went to seek help yesterday. Zhou Yurong's heart tightened. Yes, father, you mean, the tree desires stillness, but the wind will not cease. Zhou Qing sighed, his gaze becoming distant. Canal transport, military equipment, Prince's Tongxun, has likely been swept into an enormous storm. He is young and sharp, and his investigation has touched upon certain people's fundamental interests. Then what should we do? The most critical thing right now is that so-called witness. Zhou Qing tapped his fingertips on the table. If we can prove this person made a false accusation, or get them to recant, Tongxun's predicament will resolve itself. Otherwise, even if His Majesty wishes to protect him, when many mouths melt gold, it'll be hard to handle. He looked at his daughter, his gaze carrying a hint of scrutiny and barely perceptible satisfaction. Since you married him, you are now a woman of the Shu family. Now more than ever you need to stay steady, guard the household well, and don't throw yourself into disarray. As for matters outside, your father will find ways to maneuver and gather information. But whether we can find the key to breaking through, perhaps that still depends on whether Tongxun himself has left any contingencies. Her father's words were like a stabilizing anchor, slightly calming Zhou Yurong's panicked heart. Yes, she couldn't fall apart. She had to hold down this household and wait for him to return. When she returned to the Shu residence, night had already grown deep. The entrance was cold and desolate, with only 2 lanterns swaying in the night wind. She had just stepped through the gate when the butler hurried over to meet her, his expression peculiar, handing over an unsigned letter. Madam, shortly after you left, a little beggar stuffed this into the gatehouse, specifically asking for it to be delivered to you. Zhou Yurong's heart stirred. She took the letter and returned to her room, opening it impatiently. Inside was only a thin sheet of paper, with just a few words. The handwriting was scrawled yet powerful enough to pierce through the paper. It was handwriting she knew well. Stay calm. Don't worry. Guard the home, trust me. Under the 3rd brick in the west corner of the kitchen. It was a message from Shu Xuanji. He actually had a way to send word out from the Jingzhou Prefecture prison. Zhou Yurong's eyes grew warm. She suppressed her excitement and immediately whispered instructions for Yunsiu to go search the kitchen. Before long, Yunsiu brought back a small iron box wrapped tightly in oilcloth. Zhou Yurong opened it with trembling hands. Inside was not some account ledger, but several secret letters and a list. The correspondence of the secret letters shockingly pointed to the Vice Minister of War and several officials she had vaguely heard of, who had close ties to a certain prince. The contents involved routes and timing for dividing spoils from canal transport and trafficking military weapons. As for the list, it contained the names of a few seemingly insignificant small-time bosses of the canal gang and low-ranking military officers, one of whom was precisely that witness who testified against Xu Xuanji today. Besides these, there was also a small inconspicuous black iron token, engraved with a strange totem. Zhou Yurong instantly understood. This was Xu Xuanji's true trump card. He had long anticipated that the other party would counterattack, and might have even deliberately exposed a flaw to lure the snake out of its hole. These were the key evidence that could turn the tide. He told her to guard the home and trust him, and he had already set up the game. She held the items tightly in her arms, as if holding the most precious treasure. At this moment, she was no longer merely a benefactor receiving his protection, but a partner fighting alongside him. However, just as her emotions had somewhat settled, and she was preparing to carefully study the evidence, a faint, unusual sound of roof tiles being stepped on suddenly came from outside the window. Zhou Yurong's whole body stiffened, and she quickly blew out the candle beside her. In the darkness, she held her breath, hearing the faintest sound of landing, and barely perceptible footsteps heading toward her room door. Someone was prowling the Shu residence at night. Were they after what she had in her hands? The darkness was like thick, instantly splashing across the entire room. Her excited heartbeat from moments ago had not yet calmed, but now was suddenly gripped tight by icy fear. The footsteps were extremely light, like a wildcat treading on snow, yet carried a trained precision and oppressive presence, silently closing in on her room door. They were after the iron box she had just obtained. Had the other party detected it so quickly? Or had there been spies in the residence all along? A layer of cold sweat instantly seeped from Zhou Yurong's back, her heart pounding wildly, almost bursting out of her chest. She bit down hard on her lower lip, forcing herself to stay calm. Her mind spinning rapidly, too late, and it would immediately expose that she had something important. Hide. The room was large, but there was no safe place. Fight head. That would be like throwing an egg against a rock. In that split second, she suddenly remembered Xu Xuanji's words, "Guard the home. Trust me," as well as the arrangements in the residence he had seemingly hinted at from time to time. The footsteps had already stopped outside the door. A hand rested ever so lightly on the door panel, seemingly testing to push it open. Zhou Yurong hesitated no more, suddenly crouching down, and by memory fumbled to find an extremely inconspicuous protrusion on the inner side of the footboard by the bed, pressing it hard. Click, an extremely faint mechanical sound. At the same time, the door was silently pushed open a crack, and a dark shadow slipped in like a ghost. The instant, the shadow stepped into the inner chamber, from deep within the bed curtains above Zhou Yurong's head. Several fierce whooshing sounds suddenly rang out. A few short crossbow bolts shot out rapidly, aimed straight at the shadow's vital points. The shadow clearly hadn't expected such an ingenious mechanism here, and in shock, his body suddenly leaned backward while a flash of cold light gleamed in his hand, deflecting most of the bolts with clanging sounds. But one still grazed past his shoulder blade, leaving a trail of blood droplets. A muffled groan sounded in the darkness. Zhou Yurong seized this opportunity, clutching the iron box and rolling sharply to the side, hiding under the heavy pearwood desk, while shrieking loudly, "Assassin, help!" Her cry pierced the stillness of the night. Immediately, chaotic footsteps and the shouts of the guards came from outside the door. Protect the madam. The shadow, wounded and discovered, knew the mission was doomed, and without any hesitation to fight, his form flickered, and like a sparrowhawk he lunged toward the window, smashing through the lattice, and vanished instantly into the thick darkness of the night. Chase him. The guard captain's voice carried shock and fury. Hurried footsteps faded rapidly into the distance, as torchlight quickly illuminated the courtyard. Yunshu and several maids, their faces pale with fright, rushed into the room holding candlesticks. Madam, are you all right? Zhou Yurong crawled out from under the table, her hair slightly disheveled, face pale, yet forcing herself to remain calm. I am fine. She looked down at what she held in her arms. The iron box was intact. Only then did she finally let out a breath of relief, though her hands and feet were still trembling slightly. The guard captain soon returned, kneeling on one knee to apologize. This subordinate is incompetent. The thief escaped. That person's skills were extraordinary, and they were unusually familiar with the alleys outside the manor. Could you see their build or appearance? Zhou Yurong asked, her voice still carrying a hint of hoarseness. The night was too dark, and their movements too swift. I couldn't see clearly, but their shoulder blade was wounded. This subordinate has already sent men to track the blood trail and strengthened the manor's defenses. Well done. Zhou Yurong steadied herself. What happened tonight is strictly forbidden from being spread outside, but we must immediately report to the capital magistrate's office. No. She paused, then changed her words. Immediately find a way to send word into the palace. Report that we were attacked here, that the intruders had a clear target, and their skills suggest they may be military personnel. Xu Xuanji was still in prison, and capital magistrate Feng Qiang's attitude was ambiguous. She couldn't fully trust him. Going directly before the emperor might apply more pressure, and make whoever was behind this not dare to act rashly again. Yes, a flash of surprise and admiration passed through the guard captain's eyes as he accepted the order and left. After this shock, Zhou Yurong completely lost any desire to sleep. She had Yunshu relight the lamps, held the iron box tightly in her arms, and sat beneath the lamplight, her mind unable to settle. They actually dared to break into a court official's residence at night to assassinate. Such brazenness showed they had reached the point where the dagger was revealed. Xu Xuanji was in prison, and was probably not absolutely safe either. She had to do something. When dawn began to break, she had already made her decision. She changed into plain yet dignified attire, carefully made a copy of the secret letter and the list from the iron box. Then had Yunshu fetch waterproof oilcloth for the originals, wrapped them layer by layer, and hid them in a secret compartment beneath an old plum tree in the courtyard. As for the black iron token, she kept it hidden close to her body. Then, she ordered the carriage to be prepared. Madam, where are you going? Yunshu asked worriedly. The Prince of Huainan's residence. Zhou Yurong's tone was calm, yet her eyes were unusually resolute. Yunshu was shocked. Madam, it was just yesterday that, and Miss Su, it is precisely because she came just yesterday. Zhou Yurong looked at her pale face in the mirror, picked up the rouge and gently blended it on her cheeks, making herself look less fragile. Some acts must be played out fully. They want to probe my depths, to stir up this pond of water, so I'll go and let them see clearly. She was going to take a gamble. Gamble on what role the Prince of Huainan's residence played in this matter. Gamble on whether Princess Consort Xia knew anything. Gamble on whether she could find a single flaw there, or at least confuse her opponents. The carriage headed toward the Prince of Huainan's residence once more. Compared to yesterday's quietness, today, the prince's residence was bustling with visitors. Clearly, news of Xu Xuanji's imprisonment had spread, and people from all sides came in an endless stream to probe, curry favor, or watch the spectacle. Seeing her, the gatekeeper looked even more surprised than yesterday, yet didn't dare to neglect her, and hurried inside to announce her arrival. Soon, Princess Consort Shi's trusted nanny personally came out to welcome her. All smiles, yet with a hint of scrutiny. "Please come in quickly, Madame Shu. The Princess Consort was just thinking of you, and how coincidental that you've come." As she walked along, the gazes of many guests fell upon her. Some openly and some covertly, with whispers constantly reaching her ears. The Princess Consort received her in the flower hall, dressed even more gracefully and elegantly today. Upon seeing her, she warmly took her hand, her tone full of concern. "Good child, why have you come? Is it because of Tong Xun's matter?" Sigh, what a bolt from the blue. "I was shocked when I heard. Don't worry. The prince has already sent people to inquire about the news. There must be some misunderstanding." Zhou Yurong's eyes were slightly red as she lowered her eyelids, showing just the right amount of panic, helplessness, and dependence. Her voice choked with sobs. "Your Highness the Princess Consort, I really don't know what to do anymore. Last night, the residence was even burglarized. I was so scared I couldn't sleep all night. After thinking it over and over, I could only come to beg your Highness for guidance." As she spoke, her body trembled slightly, looking like someone who had been frightened beyond measure. The Princess Consort patted the back of her hand in comfort, but her eyes sharply swept over her entire body, seemingly assessing the truth of her words and her condition. Such a thing happened. What is the capital magistrate even doing, to let thieves be so rampant? Don't worry, I'll definitely have the prince look into this matter. As for Tong Xun's situation, you need to set your mind at ease even more. The innocent will be proven innocent. He had obviously heard of Zhou Yurong's arrival and hurried over. Not having seen her for a few days, he looked even thinner and more haggard, with heavy dark circles under his eyes. Seeing Zhou Yurong's fragile, frightened appearance with tears glistening in her eyes, his steps faltered, his expression extremely complicated. "Mother, Madame Shu, Madame Shu." His voice was dry and hoarse. Zhou Yurong raised her tearful eyes, and upon seeing him, shrank back slightly as if startled, timidly calling out, "Young master." Then she lowered her head, dabbing at her tears with a handkerchief, saying nothing more. This appearance of complete dependence on the prince's manner, utterly lost and helpless, seemed to slightly please Madame Xi, while making Zhao Ti feel as if his heart was being cut by a knife. The Princess Consort offered a few more words of comfort, then said, "Tear, keep Madame Shu company and talk with her. Help ease her mind. I'll go check on how the banquet preparations are going." She had actually found an excuse to leave, giving them space. Only Zhou Yurong and Zhao Ti remained in the flower hall, along with a few maidservants standing with their heads bowed. Silence spread through the air, carrying awkwardness and tension. Zhao Ti began with difficulty, his voice hoarse. "Are you all right?" Last night, Zhou Yurong raised her tearful eyes, looking at him, and suddenly interrupted him. Her voice was very low, yet clear enough, carrying a despairing lament. "Young master, that day at the hunting grounds, do you know why the horse was spooked?" Zhao Tai's entire body shook violently, his face instantly turning pale as paper, staring at her in disbelief. She remembers. She was pretending all along." Zhou Yurong took in his intense reaction, sneering coldly in her heart, yet her face still maintained that weak and helpless appearance, tears rolling down even more fiercely. I've been dreaming about what happened back then lately. It is all very blurry, but I always feel scared. Young master, tell me, was there someone who harmed me?" Her words were half true and half false, pointing out the suspicions while maintaining the pretense of blurry memories, appearing more like the wild guesses of a frightened woman based on nightmares. Zhao Ti's eyes struggled intensely. Guilt, fear, lingering dread, all kinds of emotions churned in his eyes, nearly drowning him. He abruptly stepped back, as if unable to bear her gaze and questioning. averted his eyes, and said hoarsely, "That was an accident." He turned around almost in panic, staggering away quickly, as if evil spirits were chasing him from behind. Watching his fleeing figure, Zhou Yurong slowly wiped away the tear stains on her face, picked up the teacup, took a sip of the already cold tea, her eyes filled with icy coldness. It really was him. Even if he wasn't the mastermind, he was at least someone in the know. Her words just now were like throwing a stone to test the waters, not only breaking down Zhao Ti's mental defenses, but would probably soon reach certain people's ears. She set down her teacup and was just about to take her leave when a maid came in carrying tea and refreshments. As she passed by her feet seemed to catch on the carpet, and the tray tilted. "Oh no!" the maid cried out in alarm. Though she tried desperately to steady it, a few drops of scalding tea still splashed onto Zhou Yurong's hand. "This servant deserves death. This servant deserves death." The maid was so frightened, she hurriedly knelt down and kowtowed. Zhou Yurong frowned in pain, the back of her hand instantly turning red. "You clumsy thing." The princess consort happened to return at this moment. Seeing the situation, she scolded harshly, then hurriedly pulled up Zhou Yurong's hand with concern. "Quick, quick, rinse it with cold water and bring the burn ointment." After a flurry of commotion, Zhou Yurong's hand was coated with cooling ointment. The princess consort comforted her with a few words, then personally escorted her out of the residence. The carriage departed from the prince's residence. Zhou Yurong leaned against the carriage wall, watching the passing street scenery outside the window, and slowly opened her right hand that had just been burned. In her palm, there was now a tiny paper ball crumpled into a wad. It was from that maid who had stumbled. While steadying the tray, and seemingly helping her wipe off the tea in a fluster, she had silently slipped it into her hand. Her heart rose to her throat again as she quickly unfolded the paper ball. On it were only 4 minuscule characters, the ink still fresh: Jingshin Nunnery urgent. The paper ball in her palm felt like a piece of burning coal, scalding Zhou Yurong's heart tight with anxiety. Jingshin Nunnery. Jingshin Nunnery again. Just yesterday, Xu Xuanji's guard mentioned that Su Yunhei frequently visited this place, and today, this mysterious note pointed right there. Was it a trap? Or was the maidservant who risked her life to pass the note truly friend, rather than foe? Whose message was she delivering? Su Yunhei is, or someone else in the prince's residence who was dissatisfied with the current situation, or had connections to Xu Xuanji. The carriage rumbled along the cobblestone road as thoughts raced through Zhou Yurong's mind. Go or not go? The risk was enormous. If the other party could deliver the note precisely into her hands, they must know her movements like the back of their hand. Jingshin Nunnery was located outside the city, relatively sparsely populated. If it truly was a trap, there'd be no one to hear her cries for help. But if she didn't go, what if it really was a crucial lead, concerning Xu Xuanji's safety, concerning the key to breaking the deadlock? The maidservant's risky act didn't seem fake. She recalled her father's words: the key to breaking through might lie in witnesses. She also recalled the list Xu Xuanji had left behind. Could Jingshin Nunnery be connected to some name on that list? Turn around. Zhou Yurong suddenly spoke, her voice calm. Leave the city, go to Jingshin Nunnery. The coachman was stunned. Madam, the master has instructed. I'll bear all consequences myself. Zhou Yurong's tone was resolute. Take the small roads, quickly. The carriage quietly turned, leaving the bustling streets, heading toward the secluded direction outside the city. Zhou Yurong instructed Yunsho to take out the spare plain-veiled hat and cloak. Carefully put them on, concealing her appearance. About an hour later, the carriage stopped at the foot of the mountain. Jingshin Nunnery sat halfway up the mountain, its gray tiles and white walls nestled among ancient pines and verdant cypresses. The bell sounds faint and distant, making it seem tranquil and quiet. Even somewhat excessively deserted. Zhou Yurong only brought Yunsho and the most skilled guard, walking up along the stone steps. The mountain breeze brushed past, carrying the scent of pine needles and incense. The nunnery gate was half closed, with few pilgrims around. A young nun was sweeping the courtyard. Seeing them enter, she pressed her palms together in greeting, her expression calm. "Sister, we'd like to offer some incense and pray for peace." Zhou Yurong lowered her voice. The young nun glanced at them, especially giving the guard an extra look, before lowering her eyes and saying, "Please follow me, benefactors." Inside the main hall, the Buddha statue was solemn, incense smoke curling about. Zhou Yurong offered incense as instructed, kneeling on the prayer cushion, yet her gaze inconspicuously swept around. Apart from them, there was only an old woman in coarse cloth in the corner, seemingly wiping a lamp. Everything was so calm, it was almost eerie. The person who passed her the note, what exactly did they intend by having her come here? After offering incense, the young nun said, "The dining hall has light tea prepared. Would the benefactor like to rest her feet?" Zhou Yurong's heart stirred, and she nodded. "I appreciate it, Reverend." Passing through a covered corridor, they reached the dining hall. It was not mealtime, so the hall was completely empty, with only a few simple wooden tables and stools. The young nun served the light tea and withdrew. Zhou Yurong picked up the teacup, but didn't drink, just waiting quietly. Time trickled by, with only the rustling of wind through bamboo leaves outside the window, and her own increasingly loud heartbeat. Just when she was about to think this trip had been in vain, a small door on the side of the dining hall was gently pushed open a crack. An aged, haggard face appeared. It was the old woman who had been wiping the lamps in the main hall just now. Her eyes were panicked, quickly glancing around. When she saw Zhou Yurong, a flash of urgency suddenly burst from her eyes, her lips trembling as if she wanted to say something, yet was extremely frightened. Zhou Yurong immediately stood up, but the old woman didn't dare come in. She just suddenly stretched out her hand, pointing toward a certain direction in the rear courtyard, then quickly withdrew her head. The small door closed silently, as if it had never been opened. The rear courtyard. Zhou Yurong hesitated, no longer, and immediately led Yunxiu and the guards out of the dining hall with quick steps, heading toward the direction the old woman had pointed. The rear courtyard was even more desolate than the front courtyard, with dense vegetation, and only a few old meditation rooms that looked like they were used for storing miscellaneous items. By a well platform in one corner, several pieces of women's old clothing were scattered about. Zhou Yurong's gaze swept over, and suddenly on one of the gray cloth shirts, she spotted a small dark brown stain that had already dried and hardened. It looked like a blood stain. Her heart lurched. She strode forward quickly and picked up the garment. The fabric was coarse. It was indeed what the servants in the nunnery wore. The blood stain was on the shoulder and back area, not large in size, yet alarming. Was it that maidservant who had passed the note? Was she injured? Or had she been killed? Search this area carefully. Zhou Yurong lowered her voice and commanded the guard. The guard immediately began searching around vigilantly. Yunshu nervously stayed close to protect her. Soon, among the tangled weeds behind the well platform, the guard discovered traces of freshly disturbed soil. He drew his short blade and carefully dug a few times. His expression suddenly changed. "Madam." Zhou Yurong hurried over, only to see a pale, stiff human hand emerging from the loose soil. Judging from the sleeve, it was the old woman who had guided them just now. She had been killed immediately after showing them the way. Zhou Yurong's stomach churned, and suppressing her fear and nausea, she said sternly, "Dig it out." The guard quickly cleared away the loose soil, exposing the body. There was a hideous purple-black strangulation mark around the neck, eyes wide open, full of terror. It was indeed that person from before. The killer had acted too quickly, too ruthlessly. Clearly, someone had been secretly monitoring every move at Jingxin Nunnery. Madam, we shouldn't stay here long, the guard said urgently, gripping his weapon tightly and vigilantly scanning the deep, dark woods around them. Zhou Yurong's face was pale, her heart pounding like a drum. Yet she forced herself to stay calm. She crouched down and quickly searched the corpse. Since the other party had killed to silence her, it meant this old nun must have known some secret. Her fingertips touched something hard, hidden in a secret pouch at the waist. She swiftly retrieved it. A small amulet wrapped in oilcloth. No time to examine it closely. She tucked it into her sleeve and stood up. Go. The three of them quickly retraced their steps. Their footsteps hurried. Passing through the corridor, just as they were about to return to the front courtyard, suddenly the door of a meditation room beside them creaked open. A woman wearing elegant casual attire and a veiled hat walked out, followed by two demure maids. Though dressed as an ordinary pilgrim, her commanding presence and the faintly visible silk fabrics were clearly not those of a commoner. Both parties came face to face, and both froze. The woman's gaze fell upon Zhou Yurong's slightly flustered expression, and the vigilant guards behind her, and the face beneath the veiled hat seemed to turn toward them. Zhou Yurong's heart lurched. That figure, that posture. Almost at the same moment, a mountain breeze blew past, slightly lifting a corner of the white veil on the woman's hat. Though it was just a fleeting glimpse, Zhou Yurong saw clearly. It was a well-maintained, elegant, and dignified face. Yet at this moment it carried a hint of suspicion and cold severity. The princess consort of Huainan. Why would she be here? At this time when a murder case had just occurred, appearing so inconspicuously dressed in this secluded meditation room. Their eyes met. The air instantly froze, spreading silent, turbulent waves. The princess consort had obviously recognized her too. The gaze beneath her veiled hat suddenly became sharp as ice needles, carrying undisguised shock and scrutiny, then quickly suppressed, transforming into a perfectly measured surprise. Madame Shu, why would you be here? Zhou Yurong's heart pounded wildly, alarm bells blaring in her mind, yet she struggled to maintain composure on her face, even showing a perfectly measured hint of exhaustion and sorrow. So, it is the princess consort. This humble woman's mind has been restless, and I came to the nunnery to calm my heart, praying for Buddha's blessing that my husband may soon clear his name. She curtsied slightly, her voice choked. Is your highness also here to offer incense? The princess consort's gaze swept over her, then glanced at the guards and Yunshu behind her, seeming